The National Archives for the first time had a preliminary name index on that date. After the rollout, a crowdsourcing project to a name index was begun by Family Search. Our speaker, Joel Weintraub, will provide some basic resources you should have to interpret the new information. Joel is a New Yorker by birth, an emeritus biology professor at Cal State University, Fullerton. He became interested in genealogy over 20 years ago and volunteered for 9 years at the National Archives in Southern California. Joel helped produce location tools for 1900 through 1950 federal censuses and the New York State censuses for New York City, 1905, 1915, 1925, for the Steve Morse One Step website. He has published articles since retiring on the US Census and the 72-year rule, the name change belief, and finding difficult passenger records at Ellis Island, searching New York City census records with the problems of New York City geography, and a revision of the biography of naturalist Adolphus Hermann. He has a YouTube channel with his genealogy and field biology talks at JDW Talks. His interests include birding and collecting interesting exhibits for his PowerPoint talks. So without further ado, Joel.
Hey, let me unmute myself. Let me share screen. Share. Everybody see that image?
Yes.
Yes.
Right. Now, just some logistics. I like to interact with my audience. I have a double monitor. The presentation is on my right and you're on my left. And so I would appreciate, though it's not required, that I can see you. So if you want to turn on your video, that would be great. Of course, if I see you, I might ask you questions. And I intend to do that during this talk, so we have some discussion. I will accept questions if you don't understand something during the talk, and Debbie, I think, will field that. But most of the questions, perhaps of your own research, save to the end, okay? Because we have a lot to cover. This is not a lightweight talk. So why are we here? That's an existential question, because 5 months ago, seems like a long time ago, the National Archives publicly released the 1950 US Census. And my goals here are to give you an overview of that census, the logistics, the enumerators, the forms. I'm going to discuss name indexes and how to use them and why we use them. I'm going to discuss locational tools when name indexes don't work, if you have a 1950 address or a location. I'm going to discuss problems that you may encounter or have encountered, try and explain something about the National Archives website, give you a useful handout, which you should have, and introduce you to my YouTube channel, JDW Talks. And you should have this because I'm going to refer to it. And all the links are there. Hopefully they're still, correct. I have another link later that I want you to get. So here we have actually a publicity photo, and I bought a number of these publicity photos. They were sent to newspapers. This was taken in March of 1950. And obviously, this is not a real enumerator because it started in April. And I'm going to do some review here. We're going to do some review of terminology. So here's this person. She or he is a part-time government employee. And this person is an enumerator, a census taker. So what they do is the enumeration. That's what they do. She comes up and she hesitates. She looks at her portfolio and there's a map in there. If this is a rural area, it could be a aerial photograph. And that map delineates her particular responsibility. Now, most of the ED maps that are online are going to be of the entire city or county, et cetera, but she has an individual map. And that responsibility is called an enumeration district or an ED. And that's important because that's the basic unit for this census. It's a two-part number. It's unique within a state. And I'm going to quiz you on that. I want you to remember that it's a two-part number. She rings the bell, shows her identification, and then may politely ask, "May I come in?" That's not a requirement. The homeowner can turn her down. She may have to stand there and conduct the interview. She doesn't have to go in there. And so the enumerator's penmanship may change over the course of the enumeration. She, in a 15 to 20-minute period of time, goes through the questions that she's been told not to embellish, to ask as they are written. And she has a sheet of paper, and I'll show you this. On one side is the population schedule. That's what we really want to see. She turns it over, and on the back is the housing schedule. So that's what we want to do. So let's do some basics very quickly. It's mandated by the US Constitution. It's been given the census every 10 years since 1790. There are some very interesting questions that differ between the years. And there's a 72-year privacy period. And I have an essay on this and a YouTube video on the origin of that 72-year rule. It has nothing to do with life expectancy, absolutely nothing. And it's an agreement between the census director and the archivist of the United States. And that was done in about 1940, 1950. So 72 years from 1950 is 2022. And that's why we get to see the 1950 census. The US uses the census to reapportion the House of Representatives. My own state, California, lost a seat, as did New York State, with the 2020 census, and to distribute funds to the states. So if people say, I'm not going to participate, they're losing something like $10,000 to $20,000 over a 10-year period to their community in the loss of federal funds. But a lot of people use the census, but probably the number one group are genealogists. But there are some warnings here. There are some warnings. You don't know who gave the family's information. See, number one, that's your great uncle who thought he had a great sense of humor. And so he answered the questions, who knows what he said. Actually, there's a fine for people who don't answer the census. I think it's about $100. And there's a fine if you give incorrect information, and that's $500. The government is more concerned with people who lie than people who are absent. And number three doesn't look that honest either as a person who responded. So you don't know if the respondent or the census taker was honest and truthful. You don't know if the census taker asked questions as written, heard answers accurately, or wrote them down as given. And so the warning here, clear warning, is you may end up with just junk. May not be real. The 1950 census covered the US and its territories. Alaska and Hawaii are not states. We have American Samoa, Guam, Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico and these others are not foreign countries. They're part of the United States. They are not overseas. They are not abroad. Now, I'm emphasizing that because the Census Bureau has an overview of the 1950 census. Harry Truman was the president. We're going to talk about Harry. And it says that Americans abroad were enumerated for the first time in 1950. Provisions were made to count members of the armed forces, et cetera, employees of the US government, mostly diplomatic corps, living in foreign countries along with any members of their families. This is not insignificant. There are almost, 400, there are over 480,000 people Are we going to see those people? And the answer is no. Claire Clestons has an essay on this. There's a link on the bottom right. A few islands in the Pacific have census records of military. And she says very clearly that no other records of Americans overseas are part of the 1950 census. But remember, Puerto Rico, Panama Canal Zone, Guam, yes, we have records for those. Now, one thing I am interested in is the enumerators, the people who actually do the enumeration. So I'm going to find out if Ava can become an enumerator or whether Robert can become an enumerator. Let's see if you guys qualify. And I have lots of source information. Let's find out what it takes. You had to be a US citizen. You had to have a high school education or equivalent. You were able to write neatly and legibly. And I think that this is probably the best written census that you ever see in terms of the sheets. You'll be able to talk easily with people, have good eyesight, be in good physical condition. And most important is, Barbara, do you have your own fountain pen? You had to have your own fountain pen. Do you have your own fountain pen? Because the government is not going to supply one for you. You're going to have to supply your own fountain pen. And I predicted that I would see sheets just filled with ink blots. And I haven't found very many. I found one that had that. You also had to pass a written exam, and preference was given to veterans. Now, you were also given a manual, the Enumerators Reference Manual. In 1940, the Enumerators Manual looked like this. In 1950, it's a very slick document. Really, really nice. I want you to get a copy of that manual. That's going to answer most of the questions you're going to face on it. So where do you get a copy? Well, my handout shows you one place, but you should know that the National Archive has a page, a website on the 1950 census records. And in there, they have a bunch of resources. They have instructions for, can you see my my mouse? Yes, good.
Yes.
They have the instructions for enumerators. The manual is in here. They have blank census forms. You can get a copy. We'll talk about that. They have all questions about it. They have links here in finding aids and external resources. And you will find that most of the links are to, drum roll, the one-step utilities that Steve and I and our volunteers created. You'll find that out. Hey, Triangle, it's really desperate for enumerators. You know, it's really hard to find enumerators. So I'm going to have to make you all enumerators, whether you like it or not. Here's your identification card. But you're not on your own. You're going to have a supervisor, and you're given a bunch of postcards to mail every single day as to how many people you enumerated. Infant cards, we'll talk about this. And if you don't do well, you're going to be fired. The enumerator is going to, the supervisor will fire you. There are infant cards. There are infant cards. Now, infant cards were never filmed. They don't exist today. But the idea was that if the enumerator asked, do you have a child born in January, February, or March of 1950, that they would be gotten on the schedule, because that was an undercounted group. It was an undercounted group. And here's a ad saying something new has been added. Let's make him count in America's future. If someone wasn't home, you were given a bunch of postcards. Occupant of this address, please call me or return this card and tell me when I can go and find you home. And we will find something about no one at home. We'll talk about the no one at home on the census. So if you can't find your people, it may not be because of the enumerated, it may be because they refuse to actually participate. You were given your own portfolio. Now, here's what it looks like. I couldn't believe I could find one of these on eBay. Look how big it is. Can you imagine yourself trying to write standing up on this thing? Now, this is important for a number of reasons, this portfolio. We're going to see it a couple of times. It was used to mail back the enumeration forms. It's also on the front of it has a quality control so that there's lots of checkoffs here that the supervisors did. It's a very interesting document. You will see this again because the first image of every enumeration district in 1950 is going to have a photograph of this. So I'm sure you want to find out how much money you're going to make. This was one of the things I bought. It was obviously an enumerator in Texas who tried to figure out her hours. If she was in a rural area, she probably was at an hourly rate. If she was in an urban area, she got 7 cents for each piece price that she did. That's not bad. It was 4 cents in 1940. And I calculated here that she, and this is all her handwriting, she did 808 people, got 7 cents for each of them. There's a sample, we'll talk about that. There are non-residents, there's a special form, got 7 cents, infant card, 7 cents, and then the housing schedule. And she made $87.43 for 98 hours of work. Is that good? David, is that good? Is that a good price in 1950? Yes, no, maybe? He's
I'm
muted.
muting myself. I'm sorry. I would say that's pretty good.
It is damn good because if we take a look at the 1950 economics, and that's important because there are some questions asked on the census that ask you about wages and stuff like that. You should get a perspective. 75 cents was the minimum hourly wage, $3,200, the average income, 30 cents a gallon of gasoline, 15 cents for McDonald's hamburger, 35 cents for 10 pounds of potatoes. Now, enumerators, there are 2 things you should know about that's going to confuse people when they look at your work. Baby's birthplace. So from the instruction manual, that of course you've memorized already, it says there that for a person who was born in a hospital or elsewhere outside of the state in which his family was living at the time he was born, enter the state in which his family was living, not the state in which the hospital was located. In other words, the census taker is asked to put a lie down for where the person was born if they weren't born in the same state as their parents resided. So I'm surprised more people haven't screamed, that's not where my great-grandfather was born. I know where he was born. Well, you're going to see this. A second thing is about college students. And this is one of my favorite enumeration district maps. This is College Park, Maryland. We're going to talk about college students. And who's that? College Park, Maryland. This is a little hint here. Who's at College Park, Maryland? Anybody? Robert? He's muting himself, but I can read his lips. That's the University of Maryland with the Fighting Terrapins. Okay, so why are college students important? from your manual. A student who is away from home attending the school at college level is considered a resident of the enumeration district in which he lives while attending college and not of the ED in which his home is located. So you can go up to a family that you think has a recent college entry person, just came back from the war on a GI Bill, and he's not there. The rest of the family is there. He's not there because he's at college. Enumerate him on the or her, enumerate them on the population schedule at the place where he lives while attending college, even if he is home on vacation at the time of enumeration. And these are really important. The GI Bill gave World War II servicemen and servicewomen options and benefits. Those who wish to continue their education in college or vacation schools could do so tuition-free up to $500. That's probably $5,000, while also receiving a cost of living stipend. As a result, almost 49% of college admissions in 1947 were veterans, 49%. So what's important about this enumeration district map? Where would you go find college students?
In the dorms.
Oh, they're never in dorms. You're not going to go and disturb their classes. Where would they hang out?
The bars.
So this map, now I'll tell you something about these maps. The Census Bureau did not make their own map. They got maps from wherever they could. And then once they had the map, then they drew on them the enumeration district boundaries. I don't know whether what you'll see in the upper left was drawn on the map they got initially or was drawn afterwards. So where are you going to find college students? Well, let's take a look at this. These are all the liquor places in College Park, Maryland. Every single liquor place, and whether they have on or off sales, etc. I don't trust anything coming from that particular enumeration district. All right, enumerators, you're going to have a number of schedules. Agricultural, Indian reservation. The Indian reservations didn't cover all the Indian reservations. Those people also had the regular forms, but housing and population. I want to talk about housing and population. In 1940, this is a blank 1940 form. The form is the same on both sides. And in 1940, they were given a separate form, the enumerators, for the housing schedule. But in 1950, and this is an actual, you see, the problem with the pandemic is that I used to be able to pass these around. When I gave talks, I would be able to say, hey, look, you can actually handle one of these forms. On the back is the housing schedule. Housing schedule. Can't do that anymore. Even if the pandemic was over, I don't think I could pass this around. People would be very leery about handling something from someone else who might be sick. Now, the housing information was never filmed. However, the Census Bureau for cities of 50,000 or more created pamphlets that you should know about with maps and tables. And North Carolina, you have pamphlets for these cities that you can get free online. So what does this pamphlet contain? For Durham, it will have a set of maps. This is one of the maps. There are 3 maps for the city. The large numbers are what are called census tracts, and the small numbers are every single block in Durham. Every single block in Durham has their number. And this is number 1 here in Census Tract 9. So 9-1 is unique. 10-1 would be unique. And then what you would do is you'd find which block your residence is on, and then go to a table. And the table summarizes for the block housing characteristics. So if you're interested in this, you'd find out owners versus renters, the percentage of each, whether they like private baths or running water, whether the houses on that block, how many of them were dilapidated, the average number of people per room, it's an overcrowding, occupied by non-whites, the average monthly rent, and the average value of one dwelling units. So there is a way of, at least for the block that your residence is on, to get information. I have a YouTube talk on how to do this, and there's enough information in your handout as well. The population schedule is very interesting. Now, I'm not going to go over the questions. The National Archive, Claire Kluskins, had a talk that went through all the questions, and you have a link to that if you want to see what the questions are. It's there. But I do want to go into a couple of things on this form. So here's the form. You will notice that there's a place for notes. Place for notes. What's there? Well, census takers, you have a right not only to an answer, but to a truthful answer. Don't we all? Do not accept any statement that you believe to be false. Probe tactfully for the correct answer by further questioning. If you fail, I can't do that. I thought I would blow it up. If you fail to obtain a corrected answer, enter the answer given and footnote it to indicate that you believe the answer is lying, and also what you believe is the correct answer. I don't know what they did with that, but that's kind of interesting. So the note section could have unusual entries, irregular situations, belief the respondent is wrong, and then there's a question about income. If the person refuses to ask you to answer the question about income, finally you say to them, hey, look, I'm going to give you a form. I'm going to give you a form. Confidential report. But before I give you this, on the bottom here, I put down the state, the enumeration district number, the sheet number, the line number. And after you fill this out, I'll never see this, you mail it to the Census Bureau, and then they will add it back to the census. And I make a note in the notes section that you were given, the respondent, this form. You may find out that your respondent was given this form and never followed through, and the income is blank, that they were paranoid. Let's look at sampling. If you look at this form, you'll see that there are some very heavy lines here, very heavy lines. If a name appeared on those lines, they were asked additional questions down here. There's a 20% sample. There are 6 out of 30, 20%. And one of these people were asked additional questions. So there's a sample of a sample. So when you get the form, you want to see whether your people fell on these lines here, and then look on the bottom for additional information. Of course, if the kid is 3 years old, a lot of these questions are, nothing. There are 5 versions of this form in terms of where these start. They start either on the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, or 5th line, but the columns will be the same, so that the columns are the same. There's some variation. Now, let's talk about some confusions that you may have. And the confusions are because the National Archive potentially did this. So here I'm at the National Archive site. We'll talk about more about this. This is the first thing that opened on April 1st, and you included search terms. So here I've chosen New York, and I put in an enumeration district. When I do that, up pops where I can see the population schedules. Now I want this as a sample. It actually contains my grandparents. So I come here, I open this up, and the first image is the cover of the portfolio. That's image 1. The National Archive says it is page 1. I don't want that in your memory bank. I think that is really, really bad, because by calling this page 1, it assumes you're looking at a book with sequential pages. It's not page 1, it's image 1. It's not a sheet number because it's not part of the enumeration district. Let's look at the second image. Here's the second image. It's sheet 1. Sheet 1, image 2. Forget about the page. I want to go to sheet 25, image 26, to show you that, as my grandparents here. And you will see no one at home, no one at home, no one at home. Now, that's not unusual because the census taker had a callback. But in 1950, it's unusual because they actually put this on the census schedule. So people were shocked when they saw this. They were shocked. They'd never seen that before on that. So here's my grandfather, Hyman Barman, from Russia. He's actually from old Constantine. And here's no one at home. See sheet 82, line 14. That's a callback. But people said, that makes no sense because the National Archive says you only have 42 pages here. How could you have a sheet 80, an 82 when you only have 42 pages? You must not have recorded everything. Of course, it's not sheet, it's an image. So I'll tell you what we're going to do. First of all, you should know about the notations in 1950, that these forms were blank. The census enumerator put down the number 1 here on the first form. And the second form, we put down number 2. And then when he went to callbacks, he put down the number 71. It's possible you could have 3 sheets in this enumeration district, 1, 2, 71. We are at, on that, my example, we're on the last image, 42, and the sheet is 83. If sheet 83 is on image 42, then sheet 71 is on image 30. And here is image 30, sheet 71. So what should be on image 29? Now I know this is high math.
Sheet 30?
No, it's one less. It would be, remember, that the image, et cetera. So here we are in 29 and the sheet is 28. And yeah, people said there must be something wrong here. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong. There's something wrong if you think that you're looking at pages in a book. All right, I hope that's clear. Is that clear? Yes, yes, yes. Everybody saying yes, all right. Now, there's a very rare situation that I found that's not even covered in the enumerator manual, where there's a sheet 51 that could be a jump between 2 and 51 and 51 to 71, which are transient persons not residing in permanent type living quarters. That's not even in the enumerator handbook. This was on what's called the IPUMS site, which is really nitty gritty about the census. So just forget about that. So let's find people on the 1950 US Census. The website is 1950census.archives.gov, which was the National Archive. They were the only game in town, and we spend most of our time on it. And one second after midnight on the East Coast on April 1st, I was right on my computer because I had great plans of putting 2 YouTube videos on. Now, in 1940, the website crashed and people had their fingers crossed. In 1950, I started seeing bad gateway. I started seeing things like this. And look what I'm looking for. I'm looking for John Smith. I'm looking at John Smith to test the system because I had this wonderful idea. Now, most people did not experience these problems. As you pick things here, it should appear here on your search. So I had great expectations for Harry Truman because Harry Truman had lots and lots of articles, as you can imagine, about being enumerated. And this was going to be the beginning of one of my YouTube videos. Here is Harry S. Truman. He liked to use his middle initial. Here's Margaret that I found out that's not her name. That's a middle name. She's Mary Margaret. And there's Elizabeth. And there's Mrs. Eileen Nolte. And I knew all sorts of things about her. That she was a naturalized citizen from England, had a wonderful, probably accent. I didn't know that day that she was going to be doing the Trumans. And she's writing on the full census form. There's a palm tree here. There's another palm tree here. Because where they are the little White House in Key West, Florida. It's a postcard. And they're probably right here. There are the palm trees, and there it is. So what I did was, the first thing I did was I looked for Harry Truman by name in Florida. I went through the Enumeration District that the little White House is in, and the Trumans are not in Key West, Florida. Why are they not there? Because that's their not usual residence. Where's the usual residence?
Independence, Missouri.
White House.
The White House. I looked at Independence, by the way. So I found 1251 includes the White House. Margaret's name is there. It's crossed out. Margaret was sampled. Nothing, no indication there. There's another White House person. Well, it turns out that they didn't live in the White House because the White House was undergoing renovation. They were in Blair House. So I went and looked at Blair House. And there's a note here that says Blair House, guard and usher reported instructions that all census information about Blair House was being taken care of at Key West. This means that no information about Trumans or servants will be given out. The bottom line is that the President of the United States census material is gone. No one can locate it. If you can't locate Harry Truman, what chances do you have with John Doe? Now, I have a theory about this, by the way, that the family was in a witness protection program. See, this is my theory. I'll show you. This is not a classified picture here of the family. There they are. Okay. Let's look at the National Archive search tools and a location confusion. So here we are at the National Archive. You can choose a state, a county or a city, a name, first and or last name. Put in an enumeration district, do things with the Indian reservations. And remember that the name index that they generated was by computer algorithms. So I choose North Carolina. I open this up. And what are these names? What are these names?
Counties.
There are your counties. Then I get Asheville, Buncombe. I know I'm pronouncing it right.
Buncombe.
Buncombe.
All the counties are here. Only cities of 50,000 or more are here.
Right.
So people with high expectations that you could put in a small city were very disappointed. And there's a lot of confusion here. County city entries can be ambiguous for searching for names and location. You need to understand the choices here are prefixes, ED prefixes. That Asheville has a different prefix given than the county. So let me give you a little primer, North Carolina. The first county alphabetically is Alamance. It has a prefix of 1. By the time we get to Avery, it has a prefix of 6 all the way to 11. And Asheville has a prefix of 101, which then I assume, and I didn't check this, that you have 100 counties in North Carolina.
That's correct.
Well, guess what they're going to do in 1960? I already looked at 1960. They're going to give Asheville the enumeration district of 401, and the county will remain 11. What they've done is all large cities will start with 400 in various states. It just took away some information. Really unhappy about that. So you would think that since Asheville is inside of the county, then when you're doing a search by location, it shouldn't make any difference whether you do a search here or do a search here if it's from Asheville. However, that's not what happens. You either search on enumeration district 1 dash or enumeration district 101. So when people put North Carolina, Buncombe County, and then search for an enumeration district within Asheville, they got no records found. You see the logical problem there? That it didn't make any sense. It makes sense because of the prefixes. It doesn't make any sense because of the name. Let me show you an exception to this rule. I don't want to confuse you too much, but I knew Steve would be here and I wanted to show Steve this. Here is an exception. Here's California. And then you get things like this. Alameda County, Alameda is a city. Alhambra, Los Angeles, you get all sorts of things. So let's look at Los Angeles County, 19. There are lots of cities in that are 50,000 or more, including the city of Los Angeles. So Los Angeles is a county and Los Angeles is a city. So if I do the same thing here, look for search areas, it's not moving. And underneath it, it's solid. And because of this, they were not consistent. That the Census Bureau should have had Los Angeles, Los Angeles, Los Angeles. They don't. They put both of these in a single name. They could have done that for other things, but this is an exception. This should be Los Angeles, Los Angeles, and Los Angeles. It doesn't make any difference. If you choose this, you can put in both the 66 dash and the 19. Crazy. And there's some inconsistencies through here. So if you have an ED number, let me tell you, then just choose the state and the ED number. Ignore the county city box because I told you the ED numbers are unique. So once you choose the state, if you put in the ED number, you'll go right to that ED. Now, there are name indexes. Name indexes on, and these are locational tools. We're going to go through these. Let me see what time it is. 10:52. I hate to ask Debbie how much time I have because I'd like to have another half an hour. And she says, okay. A name index is initially with Noni National Archive. Families, well, I'll show you this. So let's look at the National Archive. And let's look for this person whose name is Joel Weintraub. He's in Manhattan. How easy would it be to find this person? Well, the first thing you find out when it opened up is I can't search for Joel Weintraub. You see, what the computer did was it didn't treat these as families, it treated it by lines. And this line has no last name. So therefore, I can't search for Joel Weintraub because it's a line. The only person who has a surname of Weintraub is my dad. I could search for Joel in New York, New York. That's Manhattan. I don't want to go through 430 hits. And I'll show you where I am. So here, I'll go back. Here, I put in New York. I put in Enumeration District, which I know my address. And I put my dad's name. And this time, if I can do this with a name, it takes me to a single sheet. I'm not at the beginning. And what did the computer decide this was? Benjamin Newton Trenenbaum. Okay, all right. I've seen worse, actually, on Ellis Island. Now it says here, help us transcribe names. Okay, I can do that. And to do that, I could add surnames to these names. And so after I do that, it shows machine learning extracted names. You can see here, if you can read this, this is obviously Barbara. This is obviously Margaret. This here, Shanson Kenneth, turns out to be Kenneth Lawson. And I contributed more names. So these names don't disappear, but now both this and this are now searchable. So now I can search actually for Joel Weintraub and I go right to that page. The family search people were involved in something called a community project to proof the 1950 census. They got from Ancestry a computer-generated list of names, and they proofed it against the sheet. And as of September 5th, they claim that they're through. The 1950 U.S. Census Community Project is now complete. Thanks to almost 200,000 volunteers, 151 million people will be searchable in Family Search. Now, a couple of problems here. You have this link. It's hidden in something called a tiny URL. It's at the very bottom of your handout. You don't want to choose a state or territory. That's if you were volunteering. You want to explore the states. One of the problems with Family Search is they took this 1950 name index and they kind of meshed it into their regular offerings rather than a separate standalone. If you click on Explore Available States, you'll get to the US 1950 Census on Family Search, and you'll have this here as the index. So it's in collection 4464515. You do not have this on your handout. You don't have that on your handout. But I've just told you how to get to it by going to the project initially, etc. But it's in collection 4464515. Okay, everybody got that? You can put that in, well, you don't need to put it in the chat, you're all here. All right, so I look for Joel, New York, 1943, New York, New York. They can't find me. They couldn't find me, Joel Weintraub. They cannot find me easily. I was really disappointed. I did that a couple of days ago. I don't know. I do not know why. I think they're still doing this family bit. They have the lines correct, but I put in Joel here and it couldn't do it. Now, the third thing is Ancestry.com, which you can get to the 1950 name index for free. You may have to have kind of a registration there. But you don't have to pay any money. It says here, this is ancestry.com. It has something called Explore Maps. We'll talk about that later. So I put down here exact Joel, exact Weintraub, birth 1942. I don't put exact. I'm in New York City, New York. New York City, by definition, by the way, if you're a New Yorker, is almost always Manhattan. Doesn't have to be. And look, there are 6 Joel Weintraubs. There are 6 Joel Weintraubs born in the 1940s. I don't know why this New Jersey person shows up. I am actually the second one, so it does find me. It does find me. But, wow, look at all the Joel Weintraubs. I really feel special, don't I? So why do you want to use location tools? We have on the One Step website a tutorial quiz that leads you through how to use locational tools. And the trick is this, that if you have an address in a location, we'll get you to an enumeration district number. And from that number, you can get to the population schedule. That's the trick. You use locational tools when there isn't an adequate name index, when you have misspelled, mangled, and mistranscribed names. And the classic example is 1910 Census, Pennsylvania. So here we have the Donato family. And this was outsourced. The company that figured out the index outsourced it probably to China. So the people doing the index were not native speakers. You got Domenico, you got Dominica. I like that. That's cute. Natalie, Umbin. And then you got this kid who's less than a year old. And the enumerator put that down. What did the person who transcribed this put down? Watch not tend to get Donato. Came into the index. And actually, Ancestry has a way of adding an additional name. And so someone actually added correctly what it meant. Poor and illegible census copies. I haven't found too many of those. The 1950 census forms were microfilmed in 1952, and they were destroyed in 1961 to 1963. 4% of the population, 1 out of 25, were missed or not there on the 1950 census. So doing variations of name is not going to do you any good. However, if you knew where they lived, you can find out if their resident was actually enumerated. You can follow the enumerator as they go down the street and see whether that family participated or not in the census. For an address where the resident's name is not known, a lot of people want to find out who lived in this house 70 years ago, 80 years ago, because we have 1930, 1920, 1910, 1900. Or you're looking for John Smith in Philadelphia. You know how many there are? There are over 500 John Smiths in Philadelphia. If you had the address, you can narrow it down. Okay, there are maps, lots of maps, enumeration district maps. I have written with Steve a nice essay about the maps. I have a YouTube video on this. The National Archives put about almost 10,000 maps on their catalog. It's also in their 1950 website, but I usually use the catalog. It includes county maps and maps of cities with 5 or more EDs. So let's find the map for Durham. I go to catalog.archives.gov. You have a link to this. I enter 1950 census map Durham. And later I'll show you the one-step way of doing this. Now, I don't know if you can see this or not, but there are 1,900 hits by putting 1950 census map Durham. However, should have blown this up. There are only 8 that are maps and charts. So I can click on that And 3 of them are what I want. Here is anywhere where Durham appears, I get a hit. So here is the Durham County, Durham. That's your city. EDs from 103-1 to 103-102. Here's the county map. County has a different prefix, 32-1 to 32-32. And then there's an interesting one called Durham Urbanized. This is a new thing in 1950. It's in the county, 32, and it's surrounding Durham. The urbanized area consisted of Durham and the surrounding area that often has maps that the county map does not have. And here is your Durham map. It's really neat. The blocks are numbered. Census tracts are here as well. Now remember, there's another major resource for finding EDs by location, and that's the stevemorse.org website, which looks like this. It's at stevemorse.org, not .com, and you will want the unified tool in the U.S. Census section, which is there. So I've gone to the Morse website. I've gone to the U.S. Census section. I see the unified tool has a number of different statistics, some areas. And my advice is to bookmark that. It's really going to be important. So let's go into the website. So on the top, the default is 1950. Underneath that is 1940, 1930. You pull down the boxes. I go to North Carolina, I pick it. You notice there are boxes that are dark. You can't do anything with them right now. So I pick North Carolina, I pick Durham, and then this pops up, CED maps for Durham County. If I click on that, see, I'm on right now the unified tool. If I click on that, I now go to a utility called Viewing Enumeration District Maps in One Step. It brings across all this information, and there are the 3 maps right off the bat. And there's some other things you can do as well. The one-step map utility will get you to many 1950 ED maps that are missing, harding, misnamed, or mislinked on the catalog, including these. These have no maps. We made maps for them. Over 1 million people. Let's look at the ED definitions. Every enumeration district has a definition. The National Archives 1950 site put online the ED definitions on April 1st, 2022. They OCR'd, optical character recognition, they proofed them, but they're not searchable. But this is what we did. This is what I did. I got through interlibrary loan all 38 rolls of film. I hand digitized them. I'll show you how I did that. Steve put them online in 2013. So anybody in the world could then see the definitions. We got 30 qualified people to transcribe those definitions. We had our own protocol, so only relevant information was put down. And we put up over 230,000 definitions, and they were searchable since 2014. This is how I did it. I took a camera that you can buy now on eBay for $30, $20, an Olympus 3030. I had a macro lens. I took these rolls, most of them I could bring home. I took a picture with 2 images, 2 frames, 2 images per frame. We put them online. And then and I only missed 2 films because I had to take a picture, advance the film, take a picture, advance the film. And I only screwed up twice. And then I added them when they came online. And then what we did was I added about 80,000 more names to the definitions from county maps. And then what we did was we made street indexes for all the urban EDs, including boundary and internal streets, and I'll show you what that does. And I have YouTube videos on this. So let's find triangle, Brassfield, Durham County, North Carolina. How many people have been to Brassfield? What, North Carolina people? You have not been to Brassfield? And
You know, it's
Brassfield-
interesting because there's a Brassfield Road in Wake County, but I've never heard of it as a place name.
Well, if you do it, and of course I'm picking it not necessarily for the name, I want to show you this. There was a Brassfield station. There's a historical plaque there. I'll show you where it's located, by the way.
Okay.
This is the Durham County map. And it's on the southeast corner of Durham County. It's in Cedar Fork Township. The census tract is C20. Enumeration districts are written in orange. The boundaries are in orange. So 32-2 includes this whole area here. You have Brassfield, you have Nelson, you have Cleage, you have Glenley, you have Lowe's Grove. So none of you went.
Yeah, Lowe's Grove is very well known today. Nelson a little bit.
This is
Well,
Amy. This is
Lowe's
Amy.
Grove.
I'm pretty sure I'm the only Durham native on this call. So yeah, I'm actually familiar with these names. These are just old Durham names, but this is my hood that we're looking at right here.
Okay, well, we're gonna try and figure out.
I
How we
always
can
read that
get-
as General Lee on the lower left.
Oh, that's
Probably
possible.
Ginley and Clegg and Nelson. They still call them that. They're still marked that way on the maps now.
Right.
Oh, I opened up Pandora's box there. Okay, the question is, can we find Brassfield by doing a search on the unified tool? The enumeration district definition doesn't help. This is what an ED definition looks like. 32-2 says it's Cedar Fork Township, tract C20 with 1,000 people. None of those small communities are on the ED definition. So if you were to search for Brassfield, you could not find it. Actually, it turns out you can, but it's not in Durham. Turns out no such resource exists for the 1960 census. So I had 38 rolls of this. I can't find any rolls for 1960. So what did I do? I added to our database, Durham 32-2, Cedar Fork Township. This is what is searched. Tract C20 and should contain Brassfield, Lowe's Grove, Nelson, Lee, Clegg. So now everything in here is searchable. If there was a prison name, it would be searchable. If there was a Jewish orphanage, it would be searchable. So now what I do is I go back to the unified tool, and now there are these two dark boxes. The important one, right, that we're talking about now is this one. This one is searchable for the definitions on our enumeration districts. So I picked North Carolina. Eventually, we're going to look at this box. I picked North Carolina. I come all the way over here with city or town, and I pick other specify. When I do that, this box opens up. This is one of the few boxes that we will allow you to put in your own material because we don't trust you guys. We trust you to make mistakes. And that's why wherever you have a choice, we usually say, these are the only choices you have. You're not going to be able to put it yourself. So if I put other specify, I put down Brassfield, I type it in, and immediately what appears here are the enumeration districts that have that. Well, there are 4 of them. Interesting, with different prefixes. So I go to more details and I find out that in Granville County, there is a Brassfield Township. But the one I'm interested in is 32-2, and there is my new transcribed definition. Let's look at a larger city. Now, I tried real hard, by the way, Triangle, to use one of your cities here as an example, but it just didn't illustrate what I wanted to do. So we're going to use San Francisco, which I've used for a long time. So we have over 2,400 urban areas of at least 5 EDs and 5,000 plus people that our group has transcribed from ED maps and ED definitions, all the street names, and most of the institutions, parks, cemeteries within each ED. And that's true for your triangle cities. I'm just not using it as an example. So here we are in San Francisco, and let's see if you've been paying attention. Let's assume I have a resident here. What's the enumeration district number? See if you're paying attention. A1 is not a stake source. It is the census tract number. What is the enumeration district number?
Don't see it.
What's the number?
4-21.
Now that's 421. And by the way, this is outside the area because remember the orange eliminates it. Whenever you get a really large avenue, you can see the thickness. That's the end of it. So these are all enumeration districts. This enumeration district comes from here down to here, over here, and up here. And then this is the docks.
Is it
So maybe that's a
3?
little confusing. So I hear 3. Great. Who said that?
Barbara Friedman.
Oh, Barbara. I'm so sorry, Barbara. 3 is
I'm a
not the ED
librarian.
number.
I'm a librarian. What's
It's
that?
not. Look at this. If I put down California 3, San Francisco, it says no records found. And the reason is, and I told you I would quiz you on this, that enumeration districts are a 2-part number. And for large cities, they did not put the prefix on. Instead, you have to go to the legend and find that all ED numbers are preceded by 38. So that's 38-3. And that's probably true of your small cities like Durham, et cetera. I didn't check that. Let's find the ED number for 445 Wheeler Avenue in San Francisco for the 1950 census. And we're going to explore Ancestry's ED maps. This is wonderful. This was like magic. They brought this out about a week before the 1950 census opened up. So Ancestry.com for the 1950 census put online an overlay system, a geographical information system, which uses addresses. You enter an address and a map. You enter an address and the utility takes you to a map, modern map or 1950 map, and then goes down and finds the enumeration district number and takes you to the population schedule. The accuracy of the results depends on the availability of accurate maps. Not just accurate this way, but accurate in dimensions because you're putting one map on top of another. So the edges of cities tend to create problems for them. So here I am in Ancestry. I'm on this map program. I enter 445 Wheeler Ave. I'm not going to enter anything here. Any address in the United States. And for some reason, they show me all these things here, which I don't understand, but I choose this one. And then what they do just by entering the address is they have gone into the modern map, enumeration district map, and they tell me right off the bat that that address is 38211. They show me the enumeration district defined. Boom. Isn't that wonderful? Of course, that's the wrong enumeration district. And people get discouraged because you expect it to work perfectly. This is in beta mode. And it probably would work if they understood about the edges of cities. So here is the edge of the city. This is the city limits. Here is that, these are all 38, remember. Here is that enumeration district. They say the address here is actually in this area. It's not up here. It's over here. It's in 210. And we will find it. We don't find it by address particularly. We find it on the block it's on. So the block this is on is Wheeler, Lathrop, Peninsular, and City Limits. This is not Blanken. It's not part of this block. Tunnel is not part of this block. The only streets we use are the streets on this block. Now, there's another problem initially that they finally cleared up, and we could have told them at the beginning, both the National Archive and Ancestry, that they were going to run into problems, that someone would enter California 38210 and find no records found, because these were split into an A and a B part, and the map doesn't show it. So let's go into this. I pick California. I pick San Francisco. Look at all the EDs in San Francisco. And then up pops the street box. This, let's go back here. This street box contains all the streets in San Francisco that are from our transcription. So I open this box up and I pick Wheeler Avenue. As soon as I pick Wheeler Avenue, only 3 EDs have Wheeler Avenue in that ED. And actually none of these are boundaries. They're all internal. So now the trick is another box opens up. This box now contains all the streets within these 3 EDs. That's why it's smaller. So I pick Lathrop and I get down to 2 EDs. And another box shows up. And by the way, it shows house number here. This has nothing to do with this. If I put the house number here and press See Google Map, it's a courtesy for you that it will bring the map, street number, whoops, don't want to do that, the street number and the number into Google Map to see the streets on the block. But you don't need that. And then I pick city limits and there's the 38210A. That's how it works. And then once I have that, down beneath, I can go to the census pages, the ED description, the microfilm. Whoops, what did I do? I reversed the arrows. So this arrow is the microfilm. This arrow is our transcription. I remember that to change that. And these are the streets within it. If I press, this is a link. It goes to a universal census image view that Steve worked hard on. So now with this enumeration district, you can use the National Archive view or the Family Search view or the Ancestry viewer. And it's going to take you not to the page that you're looking for, but to the beginning sheet or the beginning image of the enumeration district. You're going to have to thumb through it. Okay, people, concluding remarks. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, how are we going to remember all this stuff? Of course, this is being recorded, right? So you can see it again. But you got a handout. You know that addresses are important. Genealogy is the science of addresses, where people were at various times. You know, there's somebody called Steve Morse. I'm not sure why. I see on my screen these blue lines. Do you see these blue lines? You do. I have no idea why those suddenly appeared. And he has a website called One Step Website. There's all sorts of tools. And then there's myself, a contributor, and I have JDW Talks on YouTube's. We have the National Archive, which has maps, and it has a computer-generated name index, which has been partially proofed. We have the Community Project, which I'm not sure where they are in terms of their completion. And then we have Ancestry, which has this overlay system and a name index. And there's also MyHeritage, which I did not look at. So we, Steve Morse, myself, and our volunteers hope that you found and will find your 1950 people. And now just a second. Just this. Wow, look at that. Look at that. Do you see that? I used to have a hat just like that. I can visualize myself in this picture. I had a hat just like that. Of course, I lived in a 5-story apartment building, not in a nice little house in Washington, D.C. In fact, I can visualize Steve there. Right there, too. He had a cap just like mine. Isn't that incredible? Yeah. Now, I'm going to turn it over to questions. I actually have a little piece on the 1960 census. And by the way, this is the housing report for Akron, Ohio. It's filled with maps. And it's filled with tables. That's what it would look like, the blocks. And so with that, that's really strange.
Mhm.
It's almost like all of a sudden I did a drawing thing.
You may have hit the annotate button, and until you clear that, it won't go away. But
Well, I'll have to figure that out. Usually,
okay.
you know, when we first started doing things like this with technology, it would never work. There would always be some problem. And it's so rare to see something not working. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing, although if you want to know something about 1960, I'll bring that back. And I'll open it to questions.
Well, let's see. Yes, and Ava's applauding, and I am too. So I don't know if Steve put that sign back up there. He's calling us to applaud. There you go. I am overwhelmed at the volunteer effort, especially Stephen and Joel's, to make the 1950 census more accessible. It boggles the mind. It really does.
Well, let me show you something that Steve and I were, and Dave Case were recognized for our work. There's something called a Shirley M. Barnes Record Access Award that we had, and they gave us this nice little clock and an inscription about collaborative work on one-step web pages, making poorly indexed records and newly released censuses accessible to all for free. Now, we didn't mention.
Wow. Does it really say
free.
poorly accessible on there? Does it say poorly?
Yes, poorly. Why, is that grammatically incorrect?
No,
Mhm.
it's just so honest.
And this is a group in Massachusetts, Steve?
Yeah.
On that. So it has, a place shelf on my desk. I'm really proud of that.
You should be. Well, Barbara, should we see who has questions? Barbara, you usually have some. I usually have some.
Well, I guess, I always assumed that the philosophy of not releasing the census with a name index, with a full name index, was to protect the privacy of individuals who were enumerated on the census. Is that a correct assumption?
Well, when you take the census, they will tell you that no one will see this, only summary information will do it, blah, blah, blah. In fact, after the Census Bureau and the archivist made this arrangement of 72 years, and it was based because as the Census Bureau gave all the information that they had, except 1980, to the archivist up to the 1870 census, and they did that in 1942. So 1870 plus 72 is 1942. And then what they did was in 1952, the Census Bureau says you could have the 1880 census now. We microfilmed it, and let's make an agreement that you will open it up to the public, etc. That was in 1952. The Census Bureau in 1960 suddenly had a change of heart and actually sued to make it permanently inaccessible. And they lost. They lost the lawsuit. Yeah, so it's a funny thing. And in fact, the Census Bureau director in 1940, when the opening day, if I remember correctly, got up in front of the audience and says, I feel funny about this because I'm sworn to protect the secrecy, and here we are publicizing it. But remember, children have no privacy. So if you're up to, let's say, 20 years of age, if you're going to be on the census, you're going to be, in your 80s, your 90s, et cetera. And so far, there haven't been any people who said, I've been defamed, I've been, et cetera, because this is now public.
I just wonder if the trade-off between privacy and accessibility, it doesn't seem worth it to protect the privacy of people after 72 years.
Listen, some places have 100 years.
I know Canada.
Australia put a note on their census saying, I wish this census to be destroyed after use. And about half the people, I think, said agreed. And so some of those censuses will not have all the records. They will have half of them. So this is an ongoing debate about privacy issues versus things. New York State, the New York censuses were put online very quickly. The first census was put on posts, so everybody in the community could see what the results were. So it wasn't until about the 1870 or 1880 census that people started to have this idea about privacy. I have in my collection authentic 1880 census forms because well, that's a long story. That's legal, by the way. The original copies were made. Other questions?
Joel, I have a related question having to do with the politics of the census. In the census that we just completed in 2020, there was this big brouhaha about whether we should be asked about our citizenship. But when I looked at my parents in the 1950s, and let me just show you because I pulled it up while you were talking.
No, it's the last one that asked that question.
What?
The 1950 census, I think, is the last one that asked for, are you a citizen or not?
Okay, well,
and they decided after that.
Okay, well, here are my parents, Tibor, and they've misspelled my mother's name, Felicita Monk. Says that he was from Hungary, she was from Poland, and they had not yet been naturalized. So you're saying this is in 1960, they no longer asked this question?
I don't think in 1960 it's a question.
Okay.
And since that time, it's been considered so political. The problem is that people probably have data to show that if you ask people for their citizenship, and they do not respond, you are depriving that neighborhood of funds, et cetera.
Right.
I mean, the politics are really something, especially when it went before the Supreme Court and they ruled that was not going to be allowable.
I wanted to also thank you and Steve for creating a way for me to understand what these codes are at the very in column C, because I was able to use Steve's one-step page to figure out what those codes were.
Why don't we let Steve say something about them? He's worked very
Okay.
hard on the coding utility.
Well, there's not much more I can say there. I do have the tables that let you determine what each code stands for. So when you see the code, you can then go to the form and find out what's behind the code. Oh, there's one column that I could not decode, the veteran status. The only way to decode that was for me to find. I was waiting for the census to open so I could see what the numbers that they put on them were. I have not found any census record where anybody put numbers, where the clerks put numbers for that column. And I've asked others. I've asked people at Ancestry. They haven't found it either. So that's sort of a mystery. But we do have the answers for all the other codes.
Thank you for that. I noticed Amy put into chat that she did have to correct half of the family's names in my mother's family. And that's pretty easy to do on the NARA site, as well as I just did it on the Ancestry site as well. So who else has a question or is embroiled in a search?
Can you tell from usage, do you measure usage? Can you tell if the 1950 census is very popular with genealogists?
I don't recall seeing any numbers. We have numbers about our own website. When the 1940 census came out, the One Step website got 2.25 million hits.
On one day, on opening day.
Opening day. For 1950, there was some competition then.
It was about half.
Yeah, because Ancestry had put out their map index that the archives had a preliminary name index, and so we got about half that. But still, that was substantial. I mean, there was great interest. I compare what happened in 1950 to 1940. In 1940, there was just tremendous anticipation, a buildup. They called it, the something generation. I've forgotten the terminology. It took a while to transcribe it from scratch. The Family Search had this map that every day you would go and look at the map to see whether your state was now done, etc. And that sort of buildup didn't seem to be as strong in 50 because we had a name index right off the bat, etc. And here we are 5 months along for 2012. There was still a tremendous amount of interest. I don't see as much interest now because of all the technology that we now in front of us.
Just to give you an example about the interest, in 1940, I was contacted by quite a few reporters, all writing stories about this and wanting to interview me. In 1950, nobody contacted me. So it just said there was much less interest at that time.
And I will tell you, in fact, if you allow me to, tell you a little bit about 1960, Debbie.
Yes, please. Because I'm going to show up in that one.
I already have a YouTube video on taking the 1960 census. It's all computer done. The forms are going to look like this. This is what the form is going to look like that you're going to see. It sure doesn't look like a 1950 form. It's all fill in the dots. Thing. The original forms they had to fill in were pretty interesting. And then I have a 1960 Enumeration Districts, end of a chapter. So my crystal ball is, I cannot find a centralized source for the descriptions. They're not available. Most of the EDs won't show their boundary descriptions, and those situations pose problems for my ability to produce locational tools. I anticipate that overlays of 1960 addresses and locations over 1960 ED maps linking to ED district numbers introduced by Ancestry.com for 1950 is sure to improve and be repeated by others for the 1960 rollout. So Steve and I will be 90. What's going to happen, Joel?
You're shooting for 100.
Not going to happen.
No?
We don't have the resources. We do not have the resources to do that. It took us 8 years to do what we did for 1950. And I have no place to start. Because the place was the EDs or the maps. And there are some maps out there, but it's the maps are, potentially you could do the maps. But if you have something like Ancestry with the maps, it precludes us. So this may be the last one. However, I should mention that we continue to maintain the website's databases. So if anybody finds something wrong, you write to us and we will figure things out. And we will see if there's a problem, whether the problem is with our resources or with our own transcriptions. So it's still very active on those websites, at least, but it's more of we're not dealing with a 1960 project right now. It's a funny feeling. So after something like 20 years, what do? I raise monarch butterflies in my backyard now.
So in 1960, did enumerators still go to every household?
What
It
happened in
was mailing.
1960, it was a mail out pickup situation. And then the enumerators walked around with these enumerator books. Enumerator book, stage 1. And that's just filled. And they picked up the forms. And then they transferred the forms to what I showed you. So even though there might have been more of a personal situation, it's gonna be a very interesting situation. And then they photographed these. And then there was a computer that took the film and put the information because on magnetic tape. You see, in 1950, they used the UNIVAC. Late. The UNIVAC was commissioned in 1951. In fact, I have a UNIVAC computer here. You want to see my UNIVAC computer? Come on, UNIVAC computer. Something like 6,000 tubes, maybe even more than that. 16,000 pounds. And the problem was in 1950 that the input was done on punch cards, basically. So that was the strangle point. But in 1960, they took these sheets, put them on magnetic tape. The magnetic tape was put into the UNIVAC computer and it sped, and that was really the start of things. So in 1950, even though they had UNIVAC, it really didn't participate much in the analysis. And one of the people who wrote an article about it says it didn't, it was overhyped. But in 1960, all of a sudden computers are big deal. So
What
you've
was,
seen
what was the
original-
housing? What was the housing survey information? How was that used?
Well, it was used for, housing projects, dilapidated houses, how many people needed running water, industries involved with that sort of thing could plan. Cities could plan maybe for putting in water lines. I mean, there's lots of things, lots of people rely on the census and the housing schedules and that sort of thing. And there's a lot more information on the housing schedule than that summary that I showed you.
Okay, other questions, Mike or Susan, David, Ava, Rusty, Robert, Megan, Edward, Karen, Amy? I'm disappointed to hear the 1960 census might be a bit of a mess because I was really looking forward to finding myself a little late in life, but you know.
Well, it's gonna, I wouldn't call it a mess. I'd say it was a challenge
Okay,
because they're dealing with two sets of forms. First of all, they're dealing with a housing form, and then they're dealing with the population form. The two. Well, let me back up. That's not true. They're dealing with two sets of forms. One set of form is the unsampled people, which includes both the housing and population. And then another form includes everything on the first form, plus the sample questions for the housing and population. So there's going to be two sets, potentially two sets of film. I don't know what they're going to do about that because some of the people here who are on what are called the 100% sample are only on this sheet. And the people who were sampled, about something like 16%, will be on this form. So that's the first thing they're going to have to do to try and figure things out. I don't think you can do it by ED definitions as well. The maps will still be there. The maps will be, and I think this overlay will be better and better and better in terms of it. But who knows, if suddenly we find an enumeration district resources, and I've asked the National Archive, I've asked the Census Bureau, I've asked experts in the area. No one seems to be able to say to me, hey, yeah, here is, you know, the enumeration district for definition. It's just not there.
So
David?
Dave's got a
yeah,
question.
I tried to do some research on the 1950 census and I gave up. It was too confusing, but I think after today, I've got an idea on how to get started and how to kind of wade through it and get some information. So I found this very, very useful.
Thank you.
Debbie?
Yes.
In your, what year is this? This is 2022. In 2042, I will be glad to come back and do a talk on the experience of an enumerator in the 1970 census.
Okay, I'm making a note, Mike. I'm making a note. I found it intriguing when you mentioned, Joel, that if the enumerator thought that somebody was lying, that there would be a note about it. My mother was lying about her age here, as she did consistently on many documents. Actually, this one is a different lie. She says she's only 1 year younger than my dad. Right here, where she says she's 24. She was actually in 1950, she was already 31. So I'm wondering, where do I find if the enumerator thought my mother didn't look 24 years old?
No, that's in the notes section
That would,
on
so I
that
have,
page, on that page.
oh, it would be on the notes section on that page. Let me
That was their
look.
instructions on that. And in fact, I doubt a lot of them would challenge that. Mike, I have a 1970 YouTube video out. See, I collected enumerated kits. I have a bunch of enumerated kits. And in fact, I'm deliberating whether to make a YouTube video on that.
I was going to
1990.
comment on that. That is possibly the cheapest material that's plastic, right?
Yeah. And so I had a couple of kits from 1970, and there's some information there. I'm not sure what I'm going to be doing with these things now, by the way, because I have all this library, and we're in the mode of downsizing. So we're trying to figure out a lot of the material. I mean, I have probably over 1,000 maps that I got for this project, and we're trying to figure out what to do with those. To either donate them to some university, or just try and resell them on eBay.
Oh, no, 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 don't do that. Don't do that. Keep it all together. Open up a little census museum.
Well, and it's important. I mean, Jewish Gen just had a person who was involved in, what was it? It was in Philadelphia. I'm trying to remember. She was going back in time. She was looking at a 1900 address, and I was able to help her using the maps I had. And it turns out that the street had changed its name, which I was the only one of the Jewish people who recognized that, because they were suggesting other ways that you couldn't find this family at this address, because they said they lived on 550 High Street. And it turned out that the street had been changed and they were right there on 550 6th Avenue. And she didn't realize that. And she got a lot of interesting suggestions of what to look. And I said, no, I don't think that's the case. So maps are important, and you can go back and resolve some questions.
Yeah, don't put it on eBay. Please don't do that.
On that. So if nobody has any more questions, I'm going to take a break and then watch the tennis match.
Thank you very much. This was great.
Yeah, it was. And thank you, Steve, too, for, just providing a little bit of extra insight, and for that, your marvelous one-step pages. They are just fantastic. Yeah, and there's some notes here in the chat. Edward is also complimenting our presenter and also Steve for this incredible contribution to our research. Thank you both so much.
And anybody who wants to stay on with a brick wall question or some other question for us, hang around. We'll be here for a few minutes.
Bye-bye, Joel. Enjoy the tennis match. Thank you, Steve, for being with us. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Barbara, I don't have a brick wall question, but I did want to share something. Mike actually, I think, brought this up at the last meeting. This is the very last issue of Avutenu. I got mine 2 months later than everybody else. I don't know if this is backwards for you or forwards, but it does say it's forwards. Okay, so you can see it says goodbye in a number of different languages. It looks like the books that Gary Mokotov published will still be available to from another publisher. I was very happy to see that the last article that I wrote for Avutenu did get published in this issue. And you might remember that I did a short little presentation about my nephew's great-grandfather who died in a train wreck. That's what this story is about. It was somehow this issue is not very well edited. I was a little bit concerned about it, but we now have we do have the entire library of Avutenu. I have it right now in an upstairs bedroom, but I do have the entire set of Avutenu for anybody who wants to do some research using this now obsolete resource. It's a shame, really.
It's a shame that there's not some academic institution to take it over, but I'm sure he shopped it around a little bit. It was was it his illness?
He got COVID. Gary got COVID, and I think things fell apart. He's in his 80s, and getting COVID at that age, as you know, it can be quite treacherous. But he also published a once-a-week newsletter, and that function has been somewhat taken over by a Jewish Jenner, Phil Goldfarb, who's doing more of a newsy, actually kind of an upbeat look at Jewish genealogy. So you can that's accessible for free. You don't have to pay for a subscription. All you have to do is get on the Jewish Gen discussion group list, and you'll get that once a week like I do. And There are some other JGSs around the country that do a newsletter that's very different from the one that you get from me. Michigas is just kind of a cut and paste effort, but there are some JGSs that do publish more lengthy contributions. So if you have an article that you're compelled, where you're compelled to write, you just have to have a place where it's going to be published, let me know, and I will let you know about those other newsletters that are available through JGSs throughout the US.
The one from Philadelphia is very good, and they would like to have more articles.
Okay, there you go.
So their website tells you how to submit.
Okay. Anybody doing any research where he or she needs some help, or maybe just something of interest?
I found myself in the 1950 census, by the way, which doesn't make me happy. I was just a little over 6 months old, and now everybody knows. But this talk inspired me again, which to try to find either my father or my grandmother in the 1925 New York census. I've never been able to do that. For all the searching I have tried. I think I know what my father's name was in 1925, but that doesn't help. But I don't know what my grandmother's name was. But there's only a limited number of possibilities. I don't know if that's something that anybody thinks they might have a stab at.
I just love that census because the years that they did it are so important in the immigration of people coming from the Pale of Settlement, because so many came between 1905 and 1925. I mean, that's the bulk of that group.
Yeah. Andrea, you're aware of that group that is constantly suing to get New York to open its records?
Oh, yes, yes, I am. And that's from my father's birth certificate. I would just like to find them in the 1925 New York census. And I have never succeeded in they just seem to be gone between 1920 and 1930.
Well, Andrea, I hate to mention this, but if you check the prison records.
I don't think that my father was 2.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, send me a couple of details, and I'll put that in the next issue of Michigas, and we'll see if somebody has some ideas for you.
Okay.
Okay.
We're not doing brick walls. I forgot the name of the guy that was. I'm not sure I want it in Michigas. Is what I'm trying to say.
Okay. No, Jeff doesn't have the time immediately to help us individually. Would you like us to try to do something right now?
Well, I don't know. It's getting to be 3. I wouldn't mind.
Have you lived in Canada?
I have not looked in Canada, but I have never ever heard the family was ever in Canada.
My daughter-in-law's grandparents and great grandfather came from Toronto through Buffalo and went to New York City. So I wonder if there was the other direction also. And where do you think they lived in New York State?
My father was born in Manhattan in 1923.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean his name was Donald Fred Hirsch.
How do you spell Hirsch?
Let me look it up. Hirsch.
CH, like that?
Hirsch, sorry.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm going to try Ancestry, and I know some of you have access to some other databases here. Let's just see what happens if I do a very quick search.
No, that's not him.
That's not him.
Right.
Okay. So let's take the exact nature of the spelling and make that a little bit, see if we get any other hits if we fuzzify things. No. All right.
And it never occurred to me to look at that record. Maybe, I mean, just because I don't know those names, maybe he's living with a cousin or something that I never heard of.
Right. Well, it looks like on the web, if you can follow me, that there are, Family Search also has,
Yeah, you know, I've
access.
looked, I've looked through all that stuff, Family Herd, Family, and it's just, I just don't know. They just disappeared.
Well, it looks like Ava's got her hand up. Maybe she's got an idea here. Oh, you're
Yeah.
muted.
No, I just wanted to say, you know, in the research that I've been doing on my husband's family, I had several instances where I found people on the ship records, you know, saying they were going to this person at this address. And in some cases, within like a month of when the census was. And I'd go and I'd look on the census and I'd go to that address because I figured out how to do that. And they weren't there. And this happened several times. And I can't figure out what happened to them and why they weren't at the address that they were. And it was consistent over time because there were a couple of people going to the same address to the same person and they weren't there.
Yeah, well, my grandmother's in the 1920 census, the federal census. So she was well in the, I don't know what year, I don't remember what year she came here, but she was well in the country in 1925. And my dad was born here in New York, in Manhattan. So, I mean, it can't, but yeah, there are, you know, I don't know. It's just, I don't know. I just find it bizarre. I think, you know, I think no, not in 1925. No, never mind. It was, it's just been something I've worked on and off, and I'd given it up till I saw this presentation. Found out how easy it was to find me.
Lenny, how about this one? Is it possible this is the Donald you're looking for? A year and a half old?
Yeah, but who's this Bertha? Who's this Lewis?
Well, I don't.
No, that can't be him. I mean, he would be a year and a half old, probably. And the census is in April, so he would actually be 2 years old, 2 years and a little bit.
Okay. Well, let's see. So that's not them either. Okay. Well, I found a Donald Hirsch, just not the right one.
Yeah,
One
there's a
those
lot of
not
Donald
you.
Hirsches around. Yeah, it's just a crazy thing. They just
know,
disappeared.
I looked for manifests for great grandparents for so long. But they came in 1894, so it's not, things
Yeah.
were a little fuzzier then.
Yeah,
Andrea,
it's not-
Andrea, do you have, we have some people here I can see on the screen who are trying to help you. Do you have parents' names, sibling names?
At that point in time, my father's only parent was his mother. His father was dead. Her name was Frances, and I don't know if she was using Hirsch or Sirkin at that time.
Sirkin, Serkin.
No, just the opposite, Sirken.
Okay.
And you can't find her either. I mean, if you can find her, I will be very impressed. And he had no siblings at that time.
Okay, well, give us a couple more minutes here. I can see people are trying their best. And you've tried the Steve Morse website?
I have a lot of, I was really happy with this talk today because I learned how to use it, at least for the 1950 census, but I have never had good luck with that site finding anything. I hope he's not still on the call.
I don't think he would be insulted by that. He'd probably be challenged by it.
But I did find myself in the 1950 census as a result of this talk.
That's great.
So now you know you exist.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
I remember I sent you an email link for, this is Rusty. I sent you an email link for New York information. I wonder if that link could have anything
You sent it to me?
for you. Yes.
I
I don't have it
remember.
in front of me, but
Wow, you sent it in email or in?
I sent it to Debbie. And
Oh.
then I believe she published it in a couple of issues back. But I don't
And it's-
remember which one, and I don't have my hands on it, but I can find it and send it to Debbie again. If
Can
she
I
wants
ask
to
you-
forward it, I
Can
can
I
do
ask you a
that.
question? Can I ask you a question? Are you related at all to Richard Jenrette?
I think my former husband was a 12th cousin, if you go back genetically, not genetically, on family
Right.
trees.
That's interesting.
It didn't help us any though.
Too bad.
Yeah.
Let me point out that you don't have to use me as an intermediary. If you're an active member, when you go on our website, there's a membership directory. So you can
Oh, okay.
always find your email addresses there. And Rusty, I do enjoy your postings. I do put them, or your emails to me. I always put them up on Facebook, because they're usually I wind up with this information somewhere in between issues of Michigas. So if you go to our Facebook page, if you've liked our Facebook page, you should be getting in your Facebook feed
Yeah, I do.
when I post.
Mm.
So you could also scroll back and look through that. That's why I was
I
mentioning.
just sort of kind of defer to you as my mentor with the newsletter and everything, and think you should have some idea of whether it's appropriate for the newsletter. So that's why I run them through you.
Well, that's very kind of you. I'm not, everything you've ever sent me has been appropriate. I'm on the
Okay.
Steve Morse website right now, and Steve does have information here about a lot of the earlier censuses, or what's the plural of censuses? Is it censi?
No.
Really sure.
Censuses. Yeah, no, it's not.
It's not. Okay, so I'll certainly do a little bit of looking around for you and see if we can find maybe a combination of Sirkin and Hirsch. Is it possible he used the name Donald Sirkin?
I would be very surprised, but it's possible.
Okay.
I mean, I anything, I just have no idea. I'm going to start searching again because I gave this up several years ago, but so in that thing you just had up, does it show the 1925 New York Census?
Let me go back and take a look. This is the Steve Morse website, and let me just use my control search function to see if there's anything that specifically mentions 1925 on it. Brooklyn 1925 name search. Yeah, New York censuses. There's a whole section here on New York state censuses. So you might want to take a look there.
Yeah,
and I would do a search under Donald Sirkin. I mean, it'd be odd, but it just takes one more search.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, why not? Okay, well, I don't want to monopolize all of this. It's just been such a strange thing.
Right.
For people my father was born here. It's he didn't get off the boat or anything.
Let's see. Let's just try this. I'll do a real quick search here. It's sending me to family search. Did he have another name besides Donald? A middle name?
No.
Okay.
He very likely, I mean, I think during that time he was living in an orphanage.
Well,
Because who could support him? I mean, his father was dead. His mother, her father was dead, died during that time too. But I mean, I've looked at orphanage lists. I've looked.
what about, were there relatives?
Yeah, I mean.
Well, have you looked for them living with any of the relatives?
I have not, but I think he was living in I suspect, no, I'm more than that. I know that he talked to my sister about living in an orphanage. But I've looked through orphanages, and their orphanages are listed in the census.
Yeah.
And they're just like anything else. I did find a Frances Sirkin living as a nurse, and she was a nurse, living in a maternity home, but she was a psychiatric nurse, so that didn't. And the maternity home was 2 blocks from where her parents were living, so she would have been living at home if she was working there. So.
But he could have been living with another relative, and the census taker put him down under the relative's surname instead of his surname. So I would search through every relative you can find to see if you can locate him that way.
Yeah, her older sister was married. He could have been living there, yeah, it's possible. Is this all being recorded?
Yes.
Yes.
Great, wonderful.
Anybody who watches through to the end of this session has a need to know.
That's right. I was just change the subject just a little bit. I was talking to my daughter's new neighbor, a wealthy Chicagoan, and he had Jewish heritage. He mentioned it, but his last name was Claremont, spelled with a K.
Wow.
K-L-A-I-R-M-O-N-T. And he said, that's been my family name for a while. And I said, I don't think so. It's not, I mean, if it were French, it would have probably been spelled with a C. And I said, do I have permission to root around in your family cellar? And of course, it didn't take me too long to find out that his name, the family name was Kaltanov, from a little town called Klincy, Russia. So he was quite surprised by that. People should never let me loose on a leash, because I'll just keep going.
You're welcome to be on this. You're off the leash.
I've got my notes. Andrea. And also I wanted to, for those of you who are, thank you for staying on the line, for our next meeting in October. I know I've got some photographs where I wonder, who is this person, or is this person the same as this in this photograph? Our speaker has asked us to send those mysteries, those photographic mysteries, 1 or 2, to him in advance. So if you've got some and you'd like our speaker Scott to take a look at this technology is absolutely amazing. So I think it'll be kind of fun for us to explore those photographic mysteries too. And that's about it for me, Barbara.
I think I'm also done. Thanks everybody for coming today, and we'll see you October the 6th. Is that the right date?
October
9th?
the 6th?
No,
Don't make-
it's not the 6th.
It's the 9th?
It's the 9th.
Okay,
See
very
you
good.
October 9th. Okay.
All right, be well,
Thank
everybody.
you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.